A warm welcome to this edition of the 4NewMobility Leadership Talk. Today we will all have the privilege to experience a conversation between 5 prominent thought leaders in the context of different areas of new mobility, addressing a topic which is, in my view, surprisingly underrepresented in the media. There's a lot of talk and a lot of information and promotion related to mobility-related technologies and services as such. But it's not the most prominent and important question, it seems, if these technologies and services are truly serving all people in an adequate way. Today, our panel with Carol Schweiger, Patrizia Niehaus, Ben Dror, Roger Atkins and Sampo Hietanen is exactly addressing this topic. First, we examine our client, I would call it this way, today's mobility, to see if today's mobility is serving all people equally or where are gaps. And afterwards, we look for existing solutions to learn from. And finally, we are allowed to dream with more visionary ideas to make mobility more fair to all people. And now, the question to the panel. Does today's mobility serve us all equally?
So I'm very pleased to be part of this panel, Hermans. Thank you so much for setting us up to discuss this very important topic. I'm Ben Dror, and I'm chairperson at Women in Mobility. And when I think about movement, I think about freedom. Yet for so many people, especially women, caregivers, elderly, and those with disabilities, mobility does not equate to freedom. It actually equates to compromise, to avoidance, to risk. So I'd like to start the conversation by sharing a bit of my story and how I found mobility ecosystem fall short of serving everyone equally. And I come from an area of conflict. So I've experienced war since being a young child. But it wasn't before an incident happened in the other side of the world, in India, and there was a story about a woman being attacked and eventually lost her life on a bus. And I was basically unable to function properly for 3 days, and that really paralyzed me. So when I think of the exposure to risk and being in a vulnerable environment, I think the most critical of all is our very basic right to freely move around and roam. And if that is taken away from us, then what are we building for?
So Maya, to follow up on what you've mentioned and that traumatic experience and how I think there are several things that you mentioned without saying them that I think are very important, which is building trust. If you have the freedom to move, you need to be moving within an environment with trust and with security. And in many cases around the world, we don't have those elements as we're traveling. And I think we need to learn a little bit more about how the most vulnerable of people need to move, need to travel, and we need to understand what those patterns are, and we need to plan our systems to make sure that everyone who is using those services has trust in the system that they're using and that they feel secure.
Maybe just to add to that, Carol, so allow me to jump in at this stage, as I'm having the honor and the pleasure to lead an organization which is thinking about developing mobility technologies that actually drives change. And we believe that organizations in general hold the key to implement the change and to be able to change our daily mobility habits. And I think we are talking a lot here about daily mobility habits of 50% of the population, right? And when I was preparing for this, I was thinking of 4 words that actually came to my mind, what it means for the vulnerables in this particular context, the females, about mobility. It's a lot about being uncertain, being restricted, unaffordable, and unsafe. And I think these are the key challenges as we could probably summarize it.
And Maya was speaking about India, but do you feel that this is the same situation also in other parts of the world?
I believe it is.
And I'm happy to give some numbers behind that. So
Sure.
when you look at World Bank data, 40% of women feel unsafe in metro stations around the world,
Yes.
compared to 55% of men, right? Or women are 2.5 times more likely to rely on men in public transportation and mobility, and that's from the OECD ITF. And 70% of women feel unsafe using public transport at night due to poor lighting or lack of security, and that's from UN Women. So we have plenty of data points to show that this is a global problem. That's not just a local problem, and that's not just stay within emerging markets. If that is what some listeners would allude to when they think about India, I would say no. It's actually everywhere. It's in our backyard, and in just different ways. And just to build on what Carol and Patrizia were saying, I think on the safety issue, I would differentiate between safety using public spaces or public transit and car safety. And I want to say that even women are more likely, or 47% more likely, to be seriously injured in car crashes, simply because the car is not designed to protect the average female body. It's designed to protect the average male body. So there are just 2 ways to look at safety within cabin and private mobility and non-private mobility.
When you're talking about that women are less protected in cars, is this related to the safety belt, or is it related to the airbag? What is the concrete difference here, so that male are safer than female?
Simply the crash test has been designed to protect the average male body, simply because male are perceived as the main drivers or the main owners of cars. And this is slowly changing. We're seeing the change coming, but not at the pace that it should. And the numbers still speak for themselves.
I could imagine that the women who have access to mobility modes like a car, yeah, even when there are topics with respect to car safety in the context of a crash, yeah, but they are still safer than women who have to use public transport and maybe other modes of transport. Yeah, I mean, how is your view on this? Is it also related to how well off you are in society?
So I believe, Herman, if you just look at these statistics, and 66% of the women are using public transportation, whereas, for example, in Germany, more than 60% of all car registrations, private car registrations, are done by males. So I think that tells you that it's just the majority is that women are using public transportation for doing the dual thing between working and taking care of family members, which obviously completely differs than the travel habits, like these the journey chains as they have it, etc. So I believe you would obviously have exceptions, right? Like, yes, I have access to a car and I use it to be safe and sound. But I think if we want to discuss this here seriously, it's about what is happening to the majority of the women in the world. And that is definitely, obviously, a significant problem, I would say.
I'm Roger Atkins. I'm a storyteller on LinkedIn. I've been trying to bring together what I see and what I hear to help people understand 2 big revolutions, the energy revolution and the mobility revolution. So when it comes to an issue like safety, be it for everybody per se or specific groups, there is a golden opportunity in front of us. We are basically redesigning the way people move from A to B. And the way goods and services move from A to B. So this is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation, or once in a multi-generation opportunity. For the first time in 100 years, we're changing what we've had, the internal combustion engine. Same with energy. We're shifting from coal and oil and gas to renewable energy. And as it happens, those two things are coming together. So as a for instance, when it comes to the safety of people fueling up their car, at this time, you have to get out of a car to fill it full of petrol or diesel. And sometimes doing that in certain environments makes people feel uncomfortable. You certainly have to do that at the moment with the charging infrastructure proposition. However, we have coming very quickly up on the development of things, wireless charging, where you don't need to get out of your car to charge it. We have, as Maya knows very, very well, incredibly well, battery swapping. Again, where you can stay in your car, you have the safety and the security of your car, be you a man or a woman. Sometimes at night and in certain other situations, that ability to stay in the car whilst you refuel it is going to be a step change for the better. So, as I say, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to redesign much of this stuff better than it's been. So that would be my certain contribution, my initial thought to what you've said.
But that is then really an advantage of an electric vehicle, yeah, especially when it's when it's possible still to stay in the car. Yeah, I fully understand this. Yeah, because with a petrol or with a diesel car, that's not possible. But now maybe I would like to bring Sampo into the discussion. Yeah, because Patrizia was speaking about public transport. Yeah, and the challenges there. And you, Sampo, you are driving forward worldwide, globally, the topic of mobility as a service. Yeah, and I think now you give it a different name, even. Yeah, if I understood it correctly. Yeah. And with respect to mobility as a service, one of the challenges is really that you have still to change from one mode of transport to another one. Yeah, we can make it. We can facilitate it, yeah, with apps. Yeah, we can facilitate it with respect to maybe bringing the modes of transport closer together and to facilitate moving from one mode of transport to another one. Is this a safety concern? Have you ever addressed it?
It's a safety concern, but it's much more than that. I'd pick up from Maya started from the word freedom, which is very important. But freedom itself in the world of mobility is just a T Ford. We know that after T Fords, all kinds of beautiful cars came along. It's also about dreams. And what I tend to say, kind of to make it obvious, in my opinion, the whole system, including also follow the money, where all the big investment go into this, is that it's been held hostage by 50 plus men. And now that I'm 50, I get to say that because you're allowed to mock yourself. That's fine. But about these dreams, it's about what kind of dreams are we driving. And I can tell a story like Maya. When I studied transport, our professor said that it's just more or less a God-given fact that when people earn enough money, they want to buy a car. And all of us at the 20s, we were, is this really true? I said, yeah, this you cannot even start to argue. And if we actually look at the real statistics of it, take in Europe, 38% of people are actually they're actively looking for an alternative to car ownership, but they just don't find any. So it's about what dream are we building this world to? If we take this also, that what is the dream? What do we make the biggest decisions, which is how those cities are built, like you just said. Everything tends to be based on, or the big decisions are based on something that we more or less made up the value of it, which is time. Which means that we build a lot of big roadways to say that, okay, we save a lot of time. This is very cost effective for society. Because if the dream is that everybody has a car and everybody goes very fast to one place from A to B with it, that's true. Take an example. We build the cities. Everybody knows that almost everywhere 500 meters is what you're willing to walk to a station, to a bus station, train station, or something, or anyways go there. They did an alternative study where the walkway was extremely beautiful by riverside, not really, side lane to a motorway or something like that. And surprise, surprise, the accepted the distance was about 1.5 to 2 kilometers, which to me would change the whole logic of how the cities are built. And to me, it goes much from what dream are we going for? And yes, of course, in a world where it's not my own car from A to B, it means that there is an interchange, which means that that interchange will have to become, because now it's friction. It causes friction in the, that's what you call it. That friction needs to become something that you actually desire. So that change, when you change from a bike or walk or scooter or shared car or whatever, and you choose go from this hub and you go to the next one, that change will have to be the best part of your day. And now I challenge you, go into any cities, go to any of the metro station and think, how far are we from that?
But I think, Sampo, with what Herman was rightly referring to, with the concept of mobility as a service, which you were, and I had the pleasure to meet you in that journey quite early. But I believe, coming back to the actual challenges, it's exactly what technology can change in this thing. Be it what Roger was saying about how do we improve the very practical side of it, right? And if we think about EV cars, Roger, just leave away the women for a moment, talk about people in wheelchairs. It's impossible,
Yeah.
right, to move the vehicle. So I totally agree with you what you said. Like, it's so beautiful to see how in the area of EV technology, we are obviously accelerating the development towards the better. Whereas on service issues, let's say, again, uncertainty, unsafe, etc. Back in 2009, you would find first studies in the internet from even the European Commission, etc., actually naming the issues, but nothing really happens in that sense. And I believe that mobility as a service, again, it was the idea to say, how can a platform link all those necessary ingredients, let's call it like that, so that you would get into a freedom of choosing your personal way how to move. It would be reliable to know, oh, I see the bus is coming, because you get real-time information. It was the time to develop on-demand bus routing and timetables and all of that, and not just like standing for hours and it's bloody dark out there. Or you carry your child, right? Or you do the grocery and you are waiting in the snow for the bus, and they do anything but cleaning the pavement. They first would remove the snow from the streets and all of that. So I think what is happening on the EV side in terms of hardware is really, really promising. But I still believe that we have an imminent issue, and Sampo was mentioning it. When you look at the number of female bus drivers or train drivers, that is ridiculously low. It is that because it's a shift system. So it's still against patterns, at least, let me simplify it, for what happens in most parts of the world. It's still the females struggling doing shift work because they have to take care of families and etc. etc. So if I talk in my terms, which is about co-design with your user, you just don't have enough female transport operators who would maybe identify this is not going well or this could be improved. So in that sense, I believe it's a bit a system immanent issue, if you understand, if that makes sense what I'm trying to say.
It does. Go ahead, Maya.
No, I love what you're mentioning on sort of representation of women in the decision maker supply chain to kind of help make that change a reality. And that's true for both public and private and for nonprofits that are observing the problem as well, and research institutions. I mean, it kind of is, and I want to kind of bring together what Sampo was saying, and Patrizia, your response on it's a systems of systems. It's always an ecosystem, isn't it? Especially in mobility, because it's true you started driving the car forward and you build an infrastructure for that. But now that you have that reality in place, you have to work in tandem, in coordination with one another. And we see some efforts on the ground, but not enough. And I completely agree that the data has been there for a long time. And that's true not just for this case, it's also true for other cases, and not to mention climate change. And it took a lot of time before people actually acted on that data. And one of the biggest hurdles on acting on data is synchronizing the steps. You know, markets need to see economics of scale, to see profitability down the line. Nobody wants to be the early adopter unless, you know, they have some sort of promise that this will pick up. And policymakers often don't want to lock the industry into certain corners, especially if it's a competitiveness, global competitiveness, and that's true for the automotive. So there is something around working in synchronicity, not just on the local level, but on the global level, and that makes it even harder. So just to say, the challenge is not small. Carol, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, you didn't, and you brought up a couple of things that I had been thinking about. One, on the planning side, how we often miss the underserved communities as we're planning these systems because, again, as you've all mentioned, those are the people that work a third shift, and they're not the ones that are going to be able to come to a public meeting, or they have no way of getting to a public meeting. And we often miss the opportunity to gather very valuable input from those individuals as we're, in many cases, now redesigning our systems. The other point that I've heard a few people mention on the data side of things, and I consider this a considerable issue, is data bias. So if all of the surveys are done from 9 to 5 during the day, and you're asking people about their experiences, whether it's about public transport or micromobility or whatever it is, who are you really speaking to? You're speaking to one segment of the population, but you haven't asked the same questions of those people who are perhaps more in need, the people that are the caregivers that have trip chaining. They're not just commuting to an office and commuting home, and the people that have to work in overnight shifts. And so a lot of the data out there, we need to be very cognizant that we're collecting data that accurately represents all of the communities. Getting back to our equity focus, is mobility equitable? We need to make it equitable for everyone by asking everyone about their needs. And I think we miss that sometimes.
I have a question to all of you. A doubt where I don't really have an answer because I think this is a bigger issue because the modes are the market models of many of the modes are so different. One of the points is that we say that public transport doesn't function, it's unsafe, it's all of this. It's also because it's for society, it's on the side of the cost. It's done not because it wouldn't be profitable before, but we know some of the reasons behind why it's pushed to the side of cities and governments paying a big subsidy on it on a monopolistic way, which to me also holds it back from all the R&D potential because it's very fragmented and all of this, which kind of leaves it always hanging. There's no big, huge investments going into public transport or something. Is this a bigger structural issue where we should have a look at how these markets, how these modes are actually produced to get it moving? Because my problem is that convenience, good services will come there where the investments go, and at the moment it's very hard to invest in a very good public transport user experience with the current structure. And this, I understand, it's a burning topic and a hot one, but somehow I feel that it doesn't become concrete unless we dare to talk about this as well.
I want to jump in, and I feel like Roger might have an input for us. But Roger started talking about one of the big revolutions, mobility and energy. And then there is another one, right? And that's autonomous mobility, right? And Daniel Sperling has been talking about the 3 revolutions in mobility. And when I think autonomous mobility, which is the next level, and obviously it's easier to go autonomous in an electric car for the reasons that Roger articulated, than in an autonomous vehicle. We've seen examples from Zoox, right, to Waymo, how we're rethinking how the vehicle will be constructed altogether. And that in-cabin attention is the opportunity for a new structure. That's one, that is potentially safer and more accommodating. And second, the pricing model will be significantly different because you cut between 50 and 70% of the cost just by removing the driver from the car and having remote control instead over a few vehicles instead of a driver per car. And the driver is the highest cost of an operating vehicle. So that kind of opens the way for that real revolution that we'll see, because the pricing is also different. So the motivation of all the actors around it to facilitate, from the city providing corp space to operators operating the vehicle, would be motivated, I think, to create a better user experience and be more user focused with more nuanced approach towards the variety of users that are using these vehicles.
Building a bit on what was introduced now, the autonomous mobility, yeah? Would you agree that autonomous mobility actually is one of maybe the most important game changer? Yeah, because when we talk about mobility as a service, I think what was lacking so far was really that you have a door-to-door service, yeah, where a vehicle is picking you up. Maybe a taxi can pick you up, yeah, but there you have a driver. It's quite costly. But in the future, autonomous mobility, there a car can come pick you up, or a bus, more flexible buses, smaller buses can pick you up at your door. Then they can bring you maybe to a tram, maybe to a train, yeah, and you can really engage in mobility as a service. And I would like also to open a bit the discussion to what Patrizia was saying. She mentioned also handicapped people. And we have not really got a bit deeper into this topic. I believe that handicapped people at the moment are in a very difficult situation still, yeah, even when we talk about mobility as a service, because some of these modes are not really for handicapped people. I think their shuttle services can make a real difference. What I wonder a bit, I mean, what we are discussing here is approaching the topic of mobility in a very systemic way.
I certainly would agree in the sense that you have to look at things from a systems perspective. And if you actually look at the discipline of systems analysis or systems engineering, it forces you to look at first the needs of the people traveling, which goes back to something that we've all sort of mentioned earlier, that we need to understand how people need to travel. And getting back to women traveling, there was a landmark study done by the Los Angeles Metro several years ago that was called Understanding How Women Travel. And it was one of the few studies of its kind in the US generally to look at the very specific needs of women caregivers needing to trip chain. And systems thinking starts with a needs assessment. So I would completely agree with you that that is a sound approach to this. It's just a challenge to follow through with the other steps that come after the needs analysis.
And I mean, you in your maybe preparation for our conversation today, you looked also at some solutions which already exist, yeah, which maybe could provide a model, yeah, for companies or for some governments. Yeah? I mean, have you found some examples, yeah, where there are solutions in some areas of this world, yeah, which could provide a model for achieving more safety for women, for achieving a better mobility situation for families, for kids, for handicapped people? I mean, are there good examples?
I think there are, Herman, but let's start from your value chain question, because all of those examples that we surely can give in 1 minute, they have one thing in common. Someone in the value chain took responsibility to implement them. Because, yes, of course, it's a value chain, but you can lay back and say, oh, I'm part of a value chain. But as long as you don't feel responsible to fix your part of the value chain, that value chain doesn't help me anything, right? So if we swap to the examples, let's take India, for example, who started, coming back to Maya's experience, which I remember very well on my side. They started having carriages which are only for females, or even trains only being for females, right? So that train company understood, okay, I can take responsibility of that problem. It's not my fault that males don't behave, but I can do something against it. I know in the Nordic countries somewhere, Sampo, they started this flexible bus stop thing, right? So that you don't have the bus stop where it's by default, but you can say, hey, if you stop here, it's just 10 minutes to go to my home. So, or 10 meters, sorry. So again, here someone took the responsibility in the value chain to find a countermeasure or to offer a countermeasure. We had trials in Germany where after a certain time at night, you could get a voucher for taxi being a female. Someone took the responsibility to finance that, right? So I think there are many good ideas out there meanwhile, lucky us as a society, but what I feel is still missing is the orchestration of that. So it's still depending on individuals, which could be organizations. And remember when I said in the beginning, I believe organizations have the key to change that. Because if it's legislation, it will take far too long. You have scattered, Sampo knows this so well, you have scattered systems of who is responsible or accountable for transportation in a country. So I believe it's a bit about understanding you have a responsibility to do that. If you want to sell a good EV, take the responsibility how it works for everyone and not only males or only females, which would be wrong as well, right? So that's why I think it's very complex, though we do have good solutions out there already.
I might want to take a bit of a different approach and say that in some ways it was the system thinking that got us here. Being a transport planner, I have a lot of this, we're all tech geeks and we want to solve this on a map, optimize everything to the route. Sadly, that doesn't sell. If it was a perfect transport planner society, we would have perfect public transport and then somebody picking up you for the last mile and all of this. Sadly, it's just not what we desire. I think what is lacking more is market-driven solutions for people. If I'd say, nobody buys a last mile solution, they just buy services. And this is what I would say we're mostly lacking. Sadly, this market is extremely complex. It's tied together with cities. It's tied together with so many different players to create a service. How I would say what is needed for people. It's not really. I'd go beyond the door to door, because door to door is
Right.
not enough. You need actually guarantee of anywhere, anytime on a whim. If I really need to nail down what it is, it's this, and it's very individual. It's very profound feeling. I need to be able to say go safely, conveniently to any place that I can think of. And let's face it, the car is very good at this. The rest are kind of catch me if you can type. And the problem I see is that we also need to redesign the markets so that they start bringing dreams, not just for the ever-growing, smaller and smaller amount of people that dream that car is the one that I want to fulfill my dream of mobility with. But it takes very big and very bold steps. It takes, yes, exactly what Patrizia said. Somebody needs to take the courage of saying, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to take it all the way. When I was starting up with Moss way before even having the company, I actually founded the company because I was trying to say to everyone was nodding, yes, this is the future, let's go. And then I said, is anyone going to do it? And I saw a lot of people looking at the ceiling saying, well, no, I want to enable, but could someone else? and this seems to be in a very, let's say, big system that needs kind of, in order to even have that dream delivered to one, whether disabled or a woman or whoever is not getting what they deserve, takes a village to build. And yeah, I suppose we need bolder joint dreams. I would call it
But Sampo,
Futurama
what do you mean by
2.0.
redesign the market? Can you explain this? Yeah, because first you said, we need market-driven solution, and then I thought, yeah, I mean everything is market-driven,
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe we are to some extent in the
Well,
mess, yeah, that everything is market-driven, yeah. But what do you mean by
let's
redesign?
take it this way. If markets are very complex and very big, like mobility is, organizations themselves probably cannot redefine markets. We're in a place where it probably needs that either jointly the industry or the governments, however, defines that, okay, hey, here's a new mobility market. We want market-driven solutions in here, but this is kind of the direction we want to go. The problem is that we all kind of understand that there's a new wave coming, but we all kind of want to be the ones showing that it's my ecosystem. But if you look at the ecosystem like a forest, it's no one's ecosystem. It's just someone's. And somebody needs to kind of set the frame where then the companies can start making beautiful pictures. And that does not exist
You're
yet.
talking about concerted actions, yeah, where several stakeholders come together and they decide, let's change the situation, and then they build a concept, and then the companies and so on make it happen.
Yeah.
Or what is your view?
Admire our industry because let's look at it. Let's admire what they did, because you would not be able to sell the cars if nobody would have come up with gas stations. I mean, it's not really much worth to have a nice car if there are no gas stations. You wouldn't be able to sell them if motorways would not have been built. And all of this happened at a time where you were not that sure if that's going to be a winning one. So they kind of created the ecosystem, and maybe building up on that, there's probably, like Roger said, this is second chance. But now we'd have to build, let's say, a new ecosystem, new market where everybody then starts going. If you want good examples, it's a very slow and starting thing. But I'd say in Italy, they're trying to incentivize the markets to go the right way, to get investments going in.
So do you have further examples of making mobility more inclusive and fairer? Yeah?
I actually have one that's very, very simple, but in public transport systems that move to automated fare collection, either with a card or a smartphone, there's still a considerable population in some areas that they don't have a smartphone. They can't afford to buy, for example, a monthly pass. They can only afford on a trip-by-trip basis to pay for the public transport trip. And there are many solutions where those individuals can still pay with cash at a local convenience store, for example, where they do have a mobility card, but they can add cash to it rather than using a smartphone that they may not have or a credit card that they may not have or a bank account that they may not have, where they're buying trips on a trip-by-trip basis. And that has been done around the US to make sure that we haven't left those unbanked or underbanked individuals behind.
No, I hear you, Carol, and I'm thinking about my experience living in the US, and that resonates. But I also am thinking about my experience living in Asia. And I spent 7 years in China, and that's where actually the reasonable term is unbanked, because people are simply leapfrogged, or credit card. People leapfrogged directly to
Yes.
applications on mobile. And even in the poorest areas, you pay via phone, and people don't want cash because there is not much to do with cash, especially if you want to buy goods that are coming from afar. And that kind of also emphasizes how complicated the issue is, because you have
Right.
different markets behaving extremely differently because their digitalization path is different. And that is tightly influencing how mobility is evolving. And just one last thing to throw out there, that we have informal mobility in many places, which is, a way of moving that has just naturally evolved and works quite well, but is untaxed and is, not part of the formal system. And I know that there are some efforts from UNEP, for example, just from a call I was in last night, I learned that they're actually working on making sure that the transition of informal mobility to zero-emission mobility is not hampering the service altogether. So that kind of, a lot of things are intertwined as we're thinking of problem solving globally.
Okay, and now if we would open the discussion to dreams, I mean, what would is there anything where you would say, I mean, if this would change, that would really have an impact, on making mobility fairer and more inclusive? Is there anything you have in mind? Any proposals? I mean, Sampo, you were talking about we have to redesign mobility. We have to redesign the market-driven approach. I mean, is there anything which you would propose which really have an impact?
My kind of dream is that mobility at the moment is for people, it's a supporting process that likes to think of itself as a main process. We're the most arrogant industry in the world, probably. What I would like, people accept the hinder of transport about 90 minutes per day. It's been like that forever. I think since Roman days we accepted. My dream of all the technology that brings is give me that 90 minutes back. So with all the AVs and something, it's not anymore wasted time. It will be my time. If we think of the AVs and such, they will not be cars. They will be offices, gyms, restaurants, dating places, movie theaters. And for some reason, we think of them still as that. So I really dream that I get that 90 minutes back to my life.
Yeah, no, I'd add in this. I don't think the electric vehicle is the revolution. I think it's the enabling technology for the revolution, which is going to be connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. I think we will look back at a world where we have cars parked everywhere on streets, in car parks and everything, as some period of lunacy. Because if you think about, the amount of time that, we use vehicles, can actually move in the vehicle compared to it being parked, it's just crazy. And I think it has distorted economies. It's distorted the social fabric of things, because it's created an enormous them and us. I mean, the whole purpose of brand in terms of prestige cars in particular is to be elitist. And people are prepared to pay for that. I am. I have many times in my life. I'm one of those people. Whether it was conscious or subconscious, I did it. I admit it. But I think we're a world where I don't need to or want to own a car anymore, but I have that mobility that I need, especially as I get older, is going to be a far better world. And if you look at the resources that are taking up in terms of building of batteries, I believe that my dream, or my sense of how we're going, to be frank, is that within 10 years, we will not be making 80 or 90 million cars a year for people to own for a period of time. We might only be making 10 or 15. And this will radically alter the auto industry. But those 10 or 15 million cars that we make will be used all the time by lots of people, many more people than have access to mobility today. So, bring it on, I say, bring it on. Bring on the revolution.
Autonomous mobility for you means actually that we are moving into the direction of autonomous shuttle services and not that people still own their own car and that's autonomous.
Correct. That goes away. I think that's just a gimmick at the moment. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I was very influenced by Maya at the conference that I was at with Sampo and a few others. She used the term democratizing mobility and said a number of things that really pricked my conscience and made me think more. This, and like I said at the beginning, I'm just a storyteller. I go around, like a magpie, picking up phrases and comments and ideas and initiatives, etc. I'm not an original thinker at all. I just assemble lots of other thinking and present it. So that's all I just said in the last 5 minutes, to be honest.
And I love what you both said, Sampo and Roger, and I think it builds on one another. So I want to add one more layer to it. So give me the time back, and then make sure that that investment is worth my while. And I'm thinking, the return of investment. Somebody told me a few months ago that if we could think of investments in new ways, the return in investment does not have to have a monetary value to it, but rather an experience value to it.
Nice.
So the idea of once I invest in my need to move, I have to invest in my need to move, right? I can walk, but there is so much I can walk. I probably have to pay for some sort of service if it's my owned vehicle, and I'm speaking two-wheelers as well, or a transit system, which I hope most of us will be using in the future because private mobility will make zero sense, to Roger's point, and will clear up the streets and everything would be much nicer. And my experience from every kilometer or mile I take would be fantastic and might actually help me connect to more people and have amazing surprises by colliding with people, not colliding with vehicles, colliding with people who happen to be amazing future business partners, friends, and so on. So that kind of experience is what I dream of.
I have a thought listening to everybody talk about this amazing nirvana in the future. And I think the one thing that potentially would give you your time back and facilitate that contact with more people is some way of incentivizing people to make the choices that are best for them. Because right now, and this is something Sampo and I have talked about quite a bit, is there are many different options for mobility, but getting in the car by myself is just the easiest and quickest way to get there. And I don't understand how much it costs every time I get in the car. So this future, I think we still need something so that travelers realize exactly what the value is in taking certain modes of transport, to be able to get your time back, to be able to connect with friends or business colleagues. And that incentives piece, we're certainly not doing it right now. We're talking about it quite a bit in the current sort of industry. but that's something I would like to see, where that incentive can be personalized.
But is it not that now things are changing? Because many of you say, there are all these vehicles, too many vehicles, too big are the vehicles, too dangerous are the vehicles. But is it not that we are in a situation that the move towards autonomous vehicles will actually make them much more acceptable? Because we are moving into providing services. And actually it becomes a mode of transport which will really make mobility as a service happen and will democratize mobility, isn't it? That we are in this situation.
I still think the time, if you look at that in the future, to me, it's still not the near term. It's the much longer term view, which is still perfectly okay. But given how much time it has already taken to get automated vehicles on the street and being used by people, there's still an acceptance part of that we're going through. Maybe that's US centric. I don't know. But I think that is much further away. Still nirvana to some degree, but it's a bit further away, I think.
Picking up what Sampo mentioned about us being an arrogant industry, and if you ask me about my vision, and for Sampo it's give me the 90 minutes back. I'm very much a fan of urban planning in terms of the 15-minute city concept, and I believe that would distribute the responsibility for improving the overall thing, and then be it with or without cars, bicycles, whatever, but distributed amongst more players. So it's not only the public transportation company, right? It's not only the employer who could do that for employees. It's really, I think, everything together. And if you would imagine that you would not even have to get on a bus to buy your grocery, or to achieve, if you would allow students to still live in cities and go to the university and don't commute for 1 hour because it's so expensive to live in the city that they just have to use any mode of transportation. So when you think it through in terms of the daily mobility decisions we have to take because of how our cities are designed and how cost of living today is driving very much that people have to really cover long distances every day, I think that is also a starting point that's worth it to look into it. And again, that is the value chain story, and who realizes I have a part in that and I can take responsibility, or I don't.
Thank you very much, Patrizia. Now, I think we covered a lot of ground. First, talking about what are the problems, the challenges which we have currently in the context of mobility? How can we make it more inclusive and fairer? Then we looked at some concrete already existing solutions. And then we were able to dream a bit, which I was very fascinated what I heard from you in the context of your dreams. But now if I ask you, maybe with one, maybe with two, maybe with three words, to give a kind of summary of what you think is most important in the context of changing from the current situation to a more fair and inclusive mobility. What would be this word or these 2 or 3 words? And maybe I just take a round and ask first, Roger, what is it?
Mine's demographics. I think there's a demographic time bomb, specifically around aging population, but other elements too, depending upon where you are. There's a gender demographic challenge in China, for sure, and in Japan. So I think what will transpire will be driven by the demographic reality over the next number of decades that will have, I genuinely think, a profound impact on what entrepreneurs and inventors and creators and legislators present to us, because it will be, what's that well-known phrase? Necessity will be the mother of invention.
Sampo?
Dreams.
Maya?
Unlock and co-create.
Carol?
Co-create was one of my thoughts. So I came up, I mean, you could also say collaborate, but my word is intentional. And it really refers to intentionally including the underserved individuals when designing mobility solutions.
Patrizia?
For me, it would be a gender sensitivity in a direct response to the original title or idea of this podcast. But the more I was listening to all of you, which was a great pleasure, it's maybe also to balance sensible versus sensitive in how we approach all of this.
What's your word, Herman?
I was
Yes.
a bit wondering about it, yeah. For me, it's courage.
Nice.
I really believe we need courage. Courage to make a change.
We do.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.